Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for a Tuesday, May the 24th, 2022. Begin today with an update, something I talked about yesterday. And this is a good news story from the Washington Examiner by Jeremiah Poff. Insurance company State Farm is discontinuing its support for the controversial Gender Cool project amid backlash following reports that the company was donating books about transgender issues targeted at 5-year-olds to school. The company said in a statement, State Farm's support of a philanthropic program, Gender Cool, has been the subject of news and customer inquiries. This program, that included books about gender identity, was intended to promote inclusivity. Conversations about gender and identity should happen at home with parents. We don't support required curriculum in schools on this topic. We support organizations providing resources for parents to have these conversations. We no longer support the program allowing for distribution of books in schools. We will continue to explore how we can support organizations that provide tools and resources that align with our commitment to diversity and inclusion. We recognize and value the diversity of all people and support a culture of respect and inclusion in the communities in which we live and work, as well as our workplace. Unquote. No information in this story about whether the people at State Farm responsible for this were sacked. So much going on in the world. Corona doom, monkeypox, Ukraine, destruction of the supply chain, collapse of the economy. But what do people really want to know about? Well, according to Andrew Court of the New York Post, Americans care more about the Depp versus Heard trial than war, abortion, and inflation. The blockbuster defamation trial between Johnny Depp and Amber Heard is currently generating more social media engagement than any other topic, according to data from media monitoring platform Newswhip. The data firm claims that the captivating courtroom drama has garnered an average of 508 social media interactions, i.e., likes, comments, and shares, for each public article over the past month. That is almost 5 times as much engagement as articles pertaining to abortion, 141 social media interactions, and more than 10 times as much engagement as articles about COVID-19, 44 social media interactions. Yes, apart from the die-hard panic mongers, Corona doom has pretty much fallen off the radar, and I'll have more about that shortly. But what is Depp versus Heard really about? Is it about Me Too? Is it about Believe Women? Is it about misogyny, sexism? Is it about, men being abused by women? And that's a topic that we don't talk about, but should? Well, no. According to Emily Schrader of the Jerusalem Post, Depp versus Heard is actually about Israel. Yep. Depp Heard, this is the Jerusalem Post. Depp Heard, Jews and the social media war. Amber Heard, a victim who doesn't fit the profile of what we expect victims of domestic violence to be like, has been demonized as all things anti-men without any regard to the facts of the case. Okay, and Israel, what now? It's not news that social media are ridden with hate, often disproportionately against specific minority groups. The internet provides a screen of anonymity that gives even the most sinister of beliefs a breeding ground with shared allies. Much has been written about the rise in anti-Semitism on social media and the glorification of anti-Israel hate. But one look at social media in the last month and the coverage of the high-profile defamation case between Amber Heard and Johnny Depp, and we see the gleeful embrace of misogyny at unprecedented, or at least previously unpublished levels. The issues and the motives may be different, but the fact that society is increasingly aroused by cruelty to others on social media should concern all of us. Again, just jump in anytime, Israel. The controversy centers around an article penned by Heard in the Washington Post in 2018, in which she spoke out about her experiences with a domestically violent partner, whom she did not name. The article came after a messy divorce from movie star Johnny Depp and a lawsuit in which a court found Depp did engage in acts of domestic violence against Heard in 12 of 14 accounts brought forward by Heard. Depp's response to the article was to sue Heard for defamation to the tune of $50 million, alleging mutual abuse, to which Heard is countersuing for $100 million. Depp's lawsuit against Heard is the current trial making waves online, with Depp's much higher profile being used by diehard fans and those with apparent issues with women to attack and demonize Heard across platforms. Okay, still waiting for Israel to pop its head in. Regardless of who is right in the trial, this bizarre phenomenon, no, it is not a bizarre phenomenon at all. Has this woman ever covered a trial? Has she ever read about a trial? People picking sides? It has exploded on social media with thousands of bots and men's rights activists championing their cause by weaponizing Johnny Depp as an icon for an anti-Me Too movement. This narrative paints women as conniving, manipulative monsters who falsely accuse men of rape and commit other man-hating crimes, and feminism is being blamed for the problems in their respective societies. Accordingly, Heard, a victim who doesn't fit the profile of what we expect victims of domestic violence to be like, has been demonized as all things anti-men without any regard to the facts of the case or the actual trial. Untrue. The stuff which has been admitted in evidence against Amber Heard, up to and including defecating on Johnny Depp's bed and then blaming it on a small dog. Pretty devastating to Amber Heard. Oh, here we go. Here we go. Let's get to the point here. Much like what happens with Israel on social media, the result of this oversimplification and cult of personality surrounding a cause is that suddenly millions of people have a strong emotional opinion on what happened without concern for the facts. That digital lynch mob is reinforced by the presence of thousands of other activists engaging in confirmation bias and ultimately egging each other on, radicalizing the entire debate. In the case of the Depp Heard trial, which looks like tens of thousands of memes nearly exclusively mocking Heard, TikTok trends bashing her, and entire accounts with tens of thousands of followers dedicated to mocking her trial testimony. On Twitter, Amber Heard is a psychopath and Amber Heard is a liar are both trending, and tens of thousands of bots are dedicated to defending Depp. A cursory glance at the comment section in a given post will display a collection of vile, misogynistic drivel that is bound to trigger any victim of domestic violence. Even Saturday Night Live mocked Heard, prompting criticism for making light of domestic violence, which was in remarkably poor taste. Oh, Saturday Night Live accused of poor taste. You mean all those years where once or twice every single episode a homosexual rape was treated as a joke on Saturday Night Live? She continues, as cruel as the mockery and demonization of Heard is, the consequences will extend far beyond her experience. Every victim of domestic violence or sexual abuse will pay the price, because what woman would ever come forward when the consequences could include millions of people participating in a gleeful celebration of their most humiliating moments and claiming they're lying? Again, this woman seems to have no familiarity with trials. Lots of people don't like to go to trial for the very obvious reason that embarrassing things will come out about them. For instance, a woman claims that someone that she put in charge of her money, a man, stole the money from her. Oh, and who was this man? Well, it was a man. And how old was he? Oh, he was 15, 20, 25 years younger than me. Did you have a romantic relationship, perhaps? Did you give him vague instructions about what to do with the money? Now, it's quite possible that the man did steal the money, but one of the reasons, again, in this particular case, which comes up all the time, that women don't want to go to trial is they don't want to look like fools. Social media mob mentality acts similar to how other in-person mobs behave. They radicalize each other and erode human empathy. Wait, okay, this is not a new phenomenon. Arabic social media has celebrated the murder of Jews for years. During every Palestinian terror attack that has occurred against Israelis, Palestinian social media was flooded with cartoons and praise of the attack. Thousands of anti-Israel activists and accounts obsessively bash Israel and excuse acts of violence against Jews, rhetoric that has proven repeatedly to lead to radicalization and real-life violence against Jews. Yes, true. What does this have to do with Johnny Depp and Amber Heard? Oh, and this writer, who is the CEO of Social Light Creative, LLC, and light is spelled L-I-T-E, concludes, today it's the Jews, tomorrow it's women. Who will be next? I responded to the Jerusalem Post with an old joke. An Englishman, a Frenchman, and a Jew are asked to write an essay about the elephant. The Englishman's essay is called The Elephant and the Empire. The Frenchman's essay is called L'éléphant et l'amour. The Jew's essay is called The Elephant. Is it good for the Jews? Not everything is about Israel, and not everything is about the Jews. I'm just kind of imagining how this essay got to be placed in the Jerusalem Post. Perhaps an editor reached out to a possible contributor and said, we want something about Johnny Depp and Amber Heard. Hasn't that pretty much been covered to death? Well, maybe you could work in Israel. Or perhaps the writer suggested that. The writer doesn't seem to have noticed that a great deal, perhaps the majority, and this has been noted elsewhere, the majority of the vituperation directed at Amber Heard has come from women. Yeah, how about that? Amber Heard clearly rubs a lot of women the wrong way. But I suppose that Emily Schrader has not been paying attention to this. The New York Post is certainly going to town on this trial with rolling coverage of it. Johnny Depp, Amber Heard, live coverage. Heard smirks during testimony over trashed luxury trailer trip. I suspect that one of the reasons that there is so much interest in this story is because of hatred of rich people and celebrities in general. This is an example of the kind of story that Oberyn used to say adds to the gaiety of the nation. In this case, it adds to the gaiety of the world. Now, there were a lot of people, both male and female, feeling sorry for Johnny Depp. I am not one of them, just as I am not one of those who felt sorry for Brad Pitt in his vicious divorce battle for the same reason. Nobody forced these men to marry crazy lesbians. Let's go to the chat. Hello to Chogakin666, Anna Dan. Hello to David the Gnome, who says, I don't remember who first wrote it, but a conspiracy theorist once said that insurance companies were well connected to the deep state. Hello to a respectable commenting a name. David the Gnome reminds us that insurance companies acquire vast amounts of personal information on citizens. Hello to Ian Durham, who says, I suppose women need to do something with their spare time. Hello to Buddy, who says, Kevin, good evening from sunny and warm Midwest USA. You should know one of the moms there asked who I was listening to. She complimented your voice. Well, I thank you and her. Play ball and let's broadcast. David the Gnome says, I can see why small hats would prefer Amber Heard types be exonerated. And the more feral the woman is, the safer their community is. Hello to Gamion. Buddy says another mom overheard and says she laughs when you stress shortened names. Jennifer, not Jen. Susie, or Jen, not Jennifer. Susie, not Susan, etc. Hello to Anran, who says, Heard went full Costanza when she testified. It isn't a lie if I believe it. Halper says, sounds like KMG is too subtle for the average middle American. Tarot Destroyer reminds us that prison rape accounted for the majority of all rapes committed in the U.S. in 2008, making the United States the first country in the world to count more rapes for men than for women. But he says, the crowd is warming to KMG. I'm telling you, the ladies at least. Always nice to hear that. Ian Durham says, is there a single straight male with a strong opinion about this trial? One would think there is enough going on in the world to render this news a non-event. Well, I mean, this is a man versus a woman versus a man. That's pretty primal, you know. Oh, yes, the Ukraine. Yes, I'm just all broken up about the Ukraine. Every man knows some other man who, claims to have been terribly mistreated by his wife or girlfriend, possibly a gold digger. And there are many men out there who claim to have been physically abused by women. And every woman knows a woman who claims to have been in a terrible relationship, who was terribly ill-treated by her man. Gamian says, it's become normal to gang up on a public figure. This is the same crowd who demonized Trump, for example. They're just a bunch of emotionally undisciplined hysterics, and herd equals depth equals turds. Susanna Berlinski says, all ladies are women, but not all women are ladies. And Quachalango says, no strong opinion here, kind of like Johnny Depp, but kind of quite a lack of judgment to get involved with based types. And who else do? Oh, Rolo Klevich. I thought it was funny that Heard's daddy ran a dog fighting ring. Oh, dear. Really? Never marry into a dog fighting family. I'm going to be talking about beauty, standards of beauty, in just a minute. And I recall some survey, perhaps there were scientists involved, that claimed a few years ago that Amber Heard was the ideal female form in both face and figure. Hello to Jason Bryan, who says, nice tie. It is my favorite. Sometimes Chick-fil-A will sell their sandwiches here, says Buddy. Kevin, please define lesbian. Oh, dear. I should have thought that was pretty easy. But no, there are some women who prefer to sleep with women and sleep with men. I don't know, just for a change, or in some cases, like Amber Heard's, is clearly situational. With Brad Pitt's ex-wife, I think it's pretty clear that Angela Jolie much prefers women to men. If you see the kind of women that she has been linked with, the Medusa-like faces, there must be, a pretty strong like-to-like sexual attraction there. Okay, who else do we have? Jason Bryan, after like the 10th time, he finally just moved back to Holland without telling her. Okay. So last night, just by accident, I happened to watch or rewatch a very famous episode of The Twilight Zone, the original one, called Eye of the Beholder. And it was written by Rod Serling, of course, the creator and host of the show, and featured, the music was by the great Bernard Herrmann. And suspended in time and space for a moment, I could do my Rod Serling impersonation. Actually, it's more of an impersonation of Maurice LaMarche, who impersonated him on Futurama. Your introduction to Miss Janet Taylor, who lives in a very private world of darkness, a universe whose dimensions are the size, thickness, length of the swath of bandages that cover her face. In a moment, we will go back to this room, and also in a moment, we will look under those bandages, keeping in mind, of course, that we are not to be surprised by what we see, because this isn't just a hospital, and this patient 307 is not just a woman. This happens to be the Twilight Zone, and Miss Janet Taylor, with you, is about to enter it. Okay, so this woman, we see her for almost the entire show, and she's got the biggest bandages on anyone's face I've ever seen. It looks like a beehive. Okay. And we learn that she is hideous. And everyone's living under some sort of world totalitarian state where uniformity is imposed on everyone. And of course, the Twilight Zone is a fantasy show. It's not a science fiction show. So no, plastic surgery wasn't indicated for this woman. Really? But you got to ignore that with the Twilight Zone. So they're pumping drugs into her in an attempt to get her face to look less hideous. Now, the surprise ending is telegraphed right from the very beginning because the show is photographed as such that we don't see any of the faces of the doctors or nurses. Now, this is Janet's 11th such course of treatment. And she is informed that if this doesn't work, she's going to be exiled to the land of the uglies. And I have to say that the voice work by Maxine Stewart is really outstanding. And this is, this pitiful woman who wants to see the sun, wants to go outside, who all she can remember from the beginning of her life are people shrieking in terror when they see her. And she doesn't really want to go to the land of the uglies and is hoping against hope that this treatment is going to work. So finally, the bandages are revealed, and who do we see? Why, it is Donna Douglas, Ellie Mae Clampett from the Beverly Hillbillies. Cute young blonde woman. And it is revealed that everyone else is hideously ugly. Hideously ugly. Pig-like. Yes, how would I say? Pig-like, demonic pig-like. And so she tries to escape, and she's eventually caught. And another one of the uglies shows up, and he's this very handsome young man and says, hey, it's not so bad, right? So you can come live with us amongst all the uglies. We have a community. So this is how Rod Serling ends the show. Now, the questions that come to mind: where is this place and when is it? What kind of world where ugliness is the norm and beauty the deviation from that norm? You want an answer? The answer is that it doesn't make any difference, because the old saying happens to be true. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and in 100 or 100 years hence, on this planet or wherever there is human life, perhaps out there in the stars, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Lesson to be learned in the Twilight Zone. Well, no, beauty is not in the eye of the beholder. Not practically, not scientifically, even. Now, it's all very well for Rod Serling to have said that, because Rod Serling was a handsome man. But strangely enough, I was reminded of this, that there was another episode of The Twilight Zone made 5 years later called The Masks. And it was written by Rod Serling and directed by the great actress Ida Lupino. So on the night of Mardi Gras, this is from Wikipedia, a wealthy old man named Jason Foster is attended to by his physician, Dr. Sam Thorne, who warns him that his death is imminent. Cranky and candid, Jason is not cheered by the arrival of his cowardly hypochondriac daughter, Emily Harper, and her family, greedy businessman husband, Wilfred, oafish, sadistic son, Wilfred Jr., and vain daughter, Paula. So the children and the in-laws hate this old man. They want him to die now. They want his money. So after openly insulting the Harpers, Foster says he has a special Mardi Gras party planned for them that night. Following dinner, the family gathers in Foster's study, where he instructs them to put on special one-of-a-kind masks that he said were crafted by an old Cajun. Explaining that an old Mardi Gras custom involves wearing a mask that is the opposite of one's personality, Foster sarcastically gives a sniveling coward mask to Emily, a miserable miser to Wilfred, a twisted buffoon to Wilfred Jr., and a narcissist to Paula, while he dons a skull mask, saying that it represents death as opposed to his life. The Harpers initially refuse to participate until Foster correctly accuses them of only being there to claim misfortune upon his death. As such, he informs them that his will is drawn up so that they inherit everything if they wear their masks until midnight. Guess what happens? Guess what happens? Reminiscent of the old taunt, keep looking like that and your face will stay like that, right? So here we see Rod Sterling admitting that there is an innate understanding of physical beauty, because if there wasn't, why go to the point of making these people permanently horrible looking? Look, everybody knows this. Everybody knows this, although there are plenty of people now who are pretending otherwise, such that we see one of the top models, catwalk models in the world, being this woman called Winnie Harlow, who has a terrible skin condition affecting her whole body and her face called vitiligo. And it's just every time I see her, I flinch. I flinch. And the fashion industry is going to pay a terrible price for this sort of thing. Oberon Waugh, who I mentioned earlier, once wrote, "Ugly women, in my experience, are seldom to be trusted. They have an inner bitterness which may take the form of religious activism or political fanaticism. There is usually a defect in their characters to match the physical flaw." I think that this is true, but of course it doesn't explain people like Amber Heard, and I could cite other names. Amber Heard, people have been nice to her, particularly men. Men have been bending over backwards for her whole life. And apparently adversity breeds character. More often, adversity breeds a miserable personality. When people are nice to you, one tends to be nice back. But we have evidence of this. Why? Scientific evidence. And you don't want to be one of those people who is going to argue with science, do you? This is from Sadie Dingfelter, and this is the American Psychological Association. Research has long shown that people assume beautiful strangers have a host of other attractive attributes, such as intelligence, competence, and kindness. Many believe this association is born of cultural influences, said Judith Langlois, PhD, at a session sponsored by the Developmental at APA's 2006 annual convention. However, Langlois' research suggests that the association of beauty with goodness may be acquired at a very early age through innate information processing mechanisms. For instance, a 1987 study by Langlois, published in Developmental Psychology, showed that infants as young as 2 months prefer to look at pretty faces, an age when they probably haven't had a chance to pick up many cultural cues about beauty, noted Langlois, a psychology professor at the University of Texas at Austin. Where did they get this preference? She asked. They have not been reading a lot of Vogue magazine. Yeah, how about that? And here is another article. This one is from the New Scientist from September 2004, Anna Gosline. Newborn babies prefer to look at attractive faces, says a UK researcher, suggesting that face recognition is hardwired at birth rather than learned. Alan Slater and his colleagues at the University of Exeter showed paired images of faces to babies as young as 1 day old and found that they spent more time fixated on the more attractive face. Attractiveness is not in the eye of the beholder. It's innate to a newborn infant, says Slater. Developmental psychologists have known for years that babies have preferences for certain objects, such as high contrast images and curvy biological shapes, but where these preferences come from remained unknown. Slater's research using extraordinarily young infants supports the ideas that babies are not mere blank slates, but instead come into the world with a fairly well-developed perception system. Last week on Twitter, I marked the death of the Spanish mezzo soprano Teresa Berganza, just one of the most gorgeous voices in history. And I noted subsequently that she was not what one would call a conventionally good looking woman, but as adduced by the evidence, there was a spark in her that greatly attracted men. And there's a lesson there. You know, there's all sorts of ways that people can be attractive rather than a simple physical beauty. You know, when I see how much money and time women spend on getting their hair done, on hair products and makeup and all the rest of that stuff, and all the money and time they spend worrying about clothes and such like. And, you know, a lot of these women are prone to claiming they can't find or keep a man. I've often thought of saying, have you ever thought of working on your personality? Because that's the first, you know, that's really impressive to men. You know, men generally seek, you know, a kindness, kind face, a kind voice. So many women who objectively good looking, their voices are just horrible. Nails on the blackboard, Valley Girls speak, that sort of vocal fry, you know. Voices are, people are powerfully affected by sound, particularly the human voice. But when I see women, you know, talking heads on TV, I thought, did no one ever take you aside and say, you know, you could work on your voice because it's bad, it's repellent. You know, there are people that you can work with who will teach you to have a more attractive voice. But all of this leads us to the hilarity of Old Navy. Old Navy is, of course, owned by the Gap. And apparently it brings in a lot more money than the Gap does. Now, I, and possibly you, had noticed, I don't know, in the last year or so, that the Gap was pivoting. Now, sorry, that the Old Navy was pivoting. That, you know, Old Navy obviously sells cheap tat, the kind of stuff that, you know, third time through the wash, it's going to start to come apart. But there's a certain type of person, well, women mostly, who just love to buy clothes. The fact that they fall apart, you know, after the third wash, or the fact that in many cases they never even wear this clothing is irrelevant. There's a, you know, a dopamine hit spending money to buy things, especially for oneself, like clothing. But the Gap, again, this pivot that they made, oh, you see, Old Navy, it suggests a certain image, right? But no, they've gone aspirational. They've gone negative aspirational. Let's celebrate people that you wouldn't want to look like because we want to be ever so inclusive. There's this one ad, which is you've probably seen. There's people dancing and they're all fat and wearing these horrible Old Navy clothes. And there's this woman in the middle. Oh, look, I'm in a clothes commercial. And again, the fashion industry used to use positive aspiration. You know, you may not be that good looking, but you know, you can buy our clothes and our clothes will make you better looking. But no, no, let's not do that anymore. And here is a story from the Wall Street Journal, which makes me just laugh and laugh and laugh. I mean, the fashion industry has completely lost the plot. This is by Suzanne Kapner. Old Navy made clothing sizes for everyone. It backfired. The clothing brand's push for inclusivity left it with a shortage of middle sizes. It's super frustrating. Old Navy set out to make clothes shopping more inclusive for women of all body sizes. It ended up with too many extra small and extra large items and too few of the rest, a mismatch that frustrated customers and contributed to falling sales and a management shakeup. These stumbles at Old Navy are a problem for its parent, Gap Inc. The chain accounts for the majority of the company's sales and profits and helps prop up the weaker Gap and Banana Republic brands. It also shows the challenges of producing a wide range of sizes that have led some brands to stop carrying plus sizes. A Gap Inc. spokesman declined to comment. Now, this is a commonplace in the fashion industry that you want to select your audience. That clothing companies would set a limit. How big are we going to make clothes? Well, and how big are the people advertising our clothes going to be? Well, they would draw a line because a certain type of person, for instance, the majority would say, I don't like this. This is not sending me the picture of who I want to be. This is not who I am. I find this repellent. So I am not attracted to this brand anymore. In the same way that Burberry, which was associated with elegance and class, got adopted by the Chavs about 20 years ago, and the brand took a hit. Dolce & Gabbana recently sponsored the wedding of one Kardashian with an ex-punk musician who is literally tattooed from the tip of his toes to the crown of his head. And they're going to take a huge hit reputationally because of this. In the same way, if you looked at fashion magazines or even pseudo-fashion magazines like Cosmopolitan, I don't know whether this is still the case, that lots of people say would like to advertise in Vogue because of how many people not just buy it, but read through it. And Vogue would say, no, we're not accepting your ads for creams that make your breasts bigger. Of course, no cream does that, because this besmirches our brand. It offends the people who buy Vogue magazine because they think that it is an arbiter of elegance in fashion. Analysts expect the company to report net sales of $3.44 billion, down from the $3.99 billion it reported in the same period last year. So Old Navy in August began offering all women's clothing styles in size 0 to 30, and XS to 4X, making it one of the first retailers to place such a big bet on inclusive sizing. It did away with separate petite and plus size departments and grouped all sizes of each style together. Mannequins in varying body shapes displayed the new wares. All sizes of a style were priced the same, a break with an industry practice in which retailers charge more for larger sizes. This is the largest integrated launch in the brand's history and an important growth driver for the business for years to come. Gap Chief Executive Sonia Singhal told analysts in August. Soon after, however, Old Navy sales started to nosedive. Last month, Nancy Green, the chain's president and chief executive, stepped down after less than 2 years running the brand. So stores were selling out of the middle sizes and were stuck with piles of very small and very large sizes, employees said. To clear out the excess goods, Old Navy put a large quantity of women's clothes on sale this spring. The move contrasts with other retailers that have held the line on discounting because of strong demand and supply side challenges that have kept some items in short supply. Well, Old Navy's not a prestige brand, but again, you start heavily discounting your offerings. Again, this lowers the opinion of your brand. I mean, there's a reason why expensive things are cherished. I was told this story decades ago. I assume it was true. But at one point, Chanel decided to radically reduce the cost of its signature Chanel No. 5 perfume. And they thought, well, the price point is more accessible to women now and to men who buy it for women. So we'll end up making more money. Instead, they made a lot less money because people assumed that the perfume had been adulterated. They also just thought, well, if it's not that expensive anymore, why would I be so excited about buying it for myself or having some man buy it for me? And so they jacked up the price again. At an Old Navy store in Queens, New York, racks of women's clothes were recently selling for 50% off. Some women's dresses were available in only XS and XXL. High-waisted canvas pants were sold out in sizes 4 through 10, but available in size 2 and in 12 to 28. Shoppers said Old Navy's message of inclusivity resonates with them, but is sometimes outweighed by the frustration of not being able to find their size. I'm not necessarily the slimmest, said Sydney Bassard of Charlotte, North Carolina. Sometimes it's hard to find clothes that aren't tight. Nonetheless, the 26-year-old speech pathologist said that since Old Navy had introduced the wider range of products, she has had a hard time finding her size, which is among those that have been in short supply since the expansion. Retailers from Victoria's Secret and Company to Target have embraced size inclusivity by adding more styles in small and large sizes to win over new customers and promote more positive body imagery. This is just a disaster for Victoria's Secret. The basis of their success was these angels, these supermodels, that the most beautiful, the sexiest women in the world wear this lingerie, with the implication that if you buy Victoria's Secret lingerie, that this sexiness will rub off on you. But yes, diversity, inclusion, and the other one that begins with an E, not equality, but no, DIE. That's what it stands for. And I'm so pleased to see this happening. Yeah, going back to this idea of women loving to buy tat, that I remember this girlfriend I once had, she literally had dozens, maybe 50 to 100 pieces of clothing that she had never worn. It was just shoved so far back in the closet, it was almost irretrievable. And eventually she started piling it up on the floor. And I said to her, you know, the better clothing establishments have big clear out sales, like once or twice a year, where 50% off is not uncommon. And this is the kind of clothing that if you buy it and, you know, treat it reasonably, it will last for years. But then you wouldn't get that dopamine hit of constantly buying cheap tat. Let's go back to the chat. Tower Destroyer says, have you heard CNN's Jean Moo's worst voice ever? What? Reasonable and Responsible, a new name to me, says, I basically wrote Ramsey off once I learned of his sordid history with that Nazi you mentioned. Okay. David Wright, hello. I don't want to talk about Andrew Anglin. Who else has known good-looking women whose personalities don't at all match their looks? Well, I have. I have certainly. You know, I talked about this woman that I knew in a different city who became a life coach, and I thought, God has been very good to you. Very good. You are exceedingly good-looking, and you are highly intelligent, and you act as if the whole sole point of the universe is to conspire against you. Maria Bartiromo's voice is the sound of artillery, says Gamion. Terra Destroyer, Abbott Costello routine. Costello, when I get married, I'm going to marry an ugly girl. Abbott, why? Because if I marry a pretty girl, she might leave me, but an ugly girl might leave you too. Yeah, but who cares? I remember years ago having this discussion with Luke Ford, and he was, I think I may have mentioned this Albert Brooks movie, Defending Your Life, where his character, we had seen that he had been married to, I think, the woman who, famous Seinfeld episode, where Mulva, very attractive woman, she left him. And Albert Brooks's character said, you know, you should find a woman just, you know, good looking enough to turn you on, and anything else is asking for trouble. The planted axiom there is that women who are less good looking are going to be nicer. No, that is a very foolish mistake. Who else do we have here? Is Ramsey Paul still around? Asked Reasonable and Responsible. Yes, I've sort of noticed that he seemed to kind of drop off the radar. Not as much as that prominent anti-spanking activist. who became very big on social media. Stefan Molyneux, who for some reason sounds just like Mick Jagger. He's got the same sort of Mockney voice, and I don't understand why. Well, here's some synchronicity from Terror Destroyer. Jerry Hall, the blonde model who recently married Rupert Murdoch, left Brian Ferry for Mick Jagger. Yes, Jerry Hall is on the cover of the Fifth Roxy Music album, Siren, where she plays a siren, and she stars in two of his mid-70s videos. Speaking of Rod Serling, KMG patterns for TT, yeah, when I rejig this, I will get to that. Buddy says, see, I was too dumb at 10 to foresee the surprise ending, which made it all the more disturbing. Well, yes. This was mocked in Futurama. They had a parody of the Twilight Zone called The Scary Door. Again, great voice work by Maurice LaMarche, who's Canadian, you know. And so they had all these different episodes. And, the Burgess Meredith one, The Last Man on Earth, where it seems that, atomic destruction has destroyed everything. But he's been harried by everyone because he just likes to read. And his boss doesn't like him to read. And his wife certainly doesn't like him to read. And there he is with the library, right? And then he drops his glasses, which cracks. And it's so unfair. It's so unfair. And so this happens. He drops his glasses and they crack. And, oh, it's so unfair. Wait a minute. My eyesight isn't that bad. I can still read the large print books. And then his eyes fall out. And then he says, wait a minute. I can read Braille. And then his hands fall off. But my favorite is the one where you see someone seemingly flattened by a hover car in the street. And then you see him in a casino. And he's pulling the lever. And he wins. He says, a casino where I win. And then we see him pulling the lever again. A casino where I always win. That can't be right. I can't be on Earth anymore. I'm in hell. And then we see him on an airplane. No, you're not in hell. You're on an airplane. And then there's the William Shatner episode, where he looks out the window and there's a gremlin there, right? It's hell. No, look, there's a gremlin. And it's no. Who do you think you are? Oh, what are you talking about? You're Hitler. And then you see that he's Hitler. And then he yells out, help me, Ava Braun. And then her face turns into a giant insect and one of her claws comes out and slices off his head. And Bender the robot says, saw it coming. You learn the vocabulary of this, right? So that it's hard to surprise people on TV shows or in movies because you know all the cliches. And so I'm always very delighted when I am surprised. But, to go back to what Fry said on Futurama, when Leela had said that what they were doing was clever and surprising, and Fry said, clever things make people feel stupid and surprising things make them feel scared. That's pretty much how television and the movies work now. Clothes you want you to buy need to look their best. They look their best on beautiful people. Simple math, says Gammon. Yes, it's true. Reasonable and responsible says, remember Dolce and Gabbana received publicity for their based rejoinder to Elton John. Pity they subsequently folded like a cheap camera, to quote the late Bob Grant. Gamian says, Old Navy is pure garbage, fast fashion. I do have a couple of cute cotton dresses from them, but it's like finding a needle in a stack of poop. Different Than says, I used to work with a short, fat girl who insisted she wore petite-sized clothing, and I looked at another female coworker who was very svelte, and we were both like, what? Strategically Adaptive Memeplex says, I prefer my fantasy clothing company. One of the lines is MJM, Mom Jeans for Men. Quachalango says, Old Navy really is the worst. Nothing fits and everything is hideous. when they first started, it was all kitsch. It was really deliberately kitsch in their ads with Morgan Fairchild and the like. It's zany, and women love zany, right? Gamian says, I hardly buy clothes anymore. When I do, it's cotton or wool. Good choice. I've been trying to find something well made, US made. Those tend to be more expensive, but worth it. Luke Ford played a highly damning expose of Stefan Molyneux. In perhaps the most egregious clip, SM counseled a 17-year-old boy to disown his parents as reasonable and responsible. Yes, I'm familiar with all that. Yeah. What happened to Katie McHugh? She has alopecia, and she lost all her hair. And for about a year, in her bitterness, she decided to compile a dossier of everything embarrassing, or what she thought was embarrassing, about people involved in what we used to call the alt-right. And then she was going to write some damning essay, and she shopped it around, and no one would publish it. So she just gave it up for free to BuzzFeed, I believe it was. And they slapped a cheap wig on her and obviously fake eyebrows. And I don't know. I had known her a little. I never met her personally. But I don't know. I felt sorry for her. But just the viciousness of what she did, difficult to forgive. David Wright says, I heard an old Molyneux podcast with his wife, cringy as hell, how in front of everybody, where he was still manipulating her to stay away from her parents. Former son-in-law did that to my wife and I. Yes, cotton New York Yankee uniforms didn't work out well. Yeah, another Seinfeld reference. You want to pre-shrink them. You want to pre-shrink them. David Brinkley used to write about... he did a memoir of life in Washington, D.C. during World War II. The remarkable story that, the senators, representatives would wear these ice cream suits, with vests. And of course, it is terrifically hot and humid in Washington, D.C. So, why weren't they all horribly stained yellow and stinky? Well, this is why. When they went to get their suits cleaned, which was frequently, the suits would be de-stitched, completely taken apart. The suits, the pants, the vest, completely taken apart. And then they would be hand-washed in tubs. Hand-washed in tubs. I mean, if you get your jackets dry cleaned, it's very difficult to actually, clean under the arms. But as I say, these were hand-washed. And then they would be put up on the tin roofs to dry. Then the pieces would be collected, stitched back together, then pressed and delivered back to the congressmen or senators. This didn't cost very much at the time because it was all black people doing it for pretty much nothing. Regular popular online hosts like Molyneux tend to end up as cult leaders, says Hauper. Indeed, that is true. Terror Destroyer says a restaurateur reduced the price of a pricey drink that was a popular choice of young men for the pretty dates. Sales plummeted as appeal of the high-priced drink was its high-priced. Yes, indeed. Indeed. So what are we going to talk about now? Where are we in the show? Almost halfway through. Let's talk about Mitt Romney. And yes, the rootless cosmopolite, who I think is really one of the worst men in America. And this is not hyperbole from me. Of course, born and raised in Michigan, where his father was governor, and then translated to Boston, where he became governor and ran for president, and then ended up in the Mormon homeworld of Utah as a senator. Mitt Romney tweeted, spending $40 billion to help Ukraine defeat Russia is one of the smartest, most economic investments we could make. War is bad for everyone. No, it isn't. War is the lifeblood, pun not intended, of the military-industrial complex. Even here in America, it interrupts the supply chain. You know what interrupts the supply chain even more than that? The President of the United States and other countries deciding to destroy the supply chain deliberately raises the price of oil and the products Americans buy, and it roils capital markets. Perhaps that's the most important thing to Senator Mitt. I responded, pouring money down a rat hole is a smart economic investment. Is that how Bain Capital worked? Actually, yes. Just ask Mattel or Toys R Us. Mitt Romney is the master of investments that leave devastation everywhere but in the wallets of the 1%. Here's a story from educationviews.org from 2018, How Bain Capital Destroyed Toys R Us, by Aaron Kiesel. You're about to read and learn how Mitt Romney's Bain Capital stole its way to ownership of Toys R Us and the reasons why it was inevitable Toys R Us was going to be slaughtered like the companies before it. Bain Capital, often at times, is very bad at running a business, may even be criminal in its ways, but unfortunately, Bain Capital is really good at bankruptcy fraud and federal corruption. Meanwhile, Romney is a happy man because Bain Capital just set a new world record with its firing of 33,000 employees. Most are unaware that Bain Capital's plot to destroy Toys R Us began 20 years ago when Goldman Sachs, in partnership with Mitt Romney, Bain Capital, and Thomas Lee Partners, shoved the learning company up Mattel's butt, damn near bankrupting Mattel via $4 billion instant catastrophic cooked books fraud loss. Delaware was where the merger happened, and Romney got protected from investigation and prosecution by his partnership with Goldman Sachs. Both Goldman Sachs and Bain Capital have been represented by the Delaware law firm of Morris, Nichols, Arsht and Tunnell, and the learning company merger with Mattel was also handled by MNAT. This law firm, had it not jumped out of the frying pan into the fire, could have claimed the firm had no idea what was going on criminally, but that plausible deniability went straight out the window when MNAT made Delaware Assistant United States Attorney Colm Colony into an MNAT partner. Once Romney got inside both MNAT's direct connection to the Department of Justice and also inside the top echelons of Mattel, then the schemes and artifice to defraud became commonplace. Bankruptcy after bankruptcy, KB, eToys, Zany Brainy, the parent company, and even FAO Schwartz were all brought down via backdoor dealing so that Bain Capital could get those toy companies as cheap as possible, and Goldman Sachs could get away with billions of dollars in fraud as the end result. America is shell-shocked now at the complete demise of Toys R Us. From the 33,000 laid-off employees all the way down to the KB and eToys case whistleblower, Laser Haas, people everywhere are expressing their concerns about the lack of candor at the real reasons behind the senseless killing of Toys R Us. It was once a joy to be a Toys R Us kid, but Romney's Bain Capital took that joy away. Adult greed destroyed children's dreams again. Meanwhile, Bain Capital and Bain's executives receive untold millions, and the 33,000 employees of Toys R Us were given Mitt's joy of firing people, a straight middle finger. Truth be told, Goldman Sachs and Bain Capital personnel, along with their lawyers, including possibly Jay Clayton, should be indicted for obstruction. Romney and Goldman Sachs racketeering thrives on refusals to prosecute corruption. Those who have been following this reporter's series of articles on Wall Street fraud and the abysmal failure of the federal system of justice know full well that there are multiple dynamics of federal court and federal agent corruption in numerous toy store bankruptcy cases. Unfortunately, thousands of people lost collective billions, and people have died to get rich quick, including eToys shareholder Robert Alber and Marty Lackner, who woke up dead. Marty was the brother of Minnesota Assistant U.S. Attorney James Lackner. Readers should better understand how these rackets operate by the end of this article. It is a fact that Goldman Sachs personnel are in partnership with Bain Capital parties, and that those Sachs and Bain employees have colluded to rip off investors and companies, both private and public, for billions of dollars for more than 20 years. Unfortunately, the federal system of justice is part of the problem, not the underlying solution. The DOJ would be embarrassed if all the facts were to come out in formal proceedings, that the justice system would rather remain staunchly silent concerning the fact that the DOJ has been willfully blind, which is aiding and abetting the white-collar organized crimes of Wall Street. It is a pathetic state of affairs that led to the implosion of Toys R Us for ill-gotten profits. Many questions still remain unanswered as to what federal agents or judges received to assure that Goldman Sachs and Bain Capital's two-decade crime spree will succeed unimpeded from law enforcement. Yes, this is a very long essay, which you can find at educationviews.org. Here's how Bain Capital destroyed Toys R Us. There's another company which Bain Capital pretty much completely destroyed and just lost people billions of dollars, and that was called Mattel. You know, remember Mattel? It's swell. And Matt Taibbi, some years ago, well, a decade ago, wrote extensively about the wickedness that is Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney decries the national debt, but his career was made up by running up debt on companies on their last lifeline. Quote, the result has been a brilliant comedy. A man makes a $250 million fortune, loading up companies with debt and then extracting million-dollar fees from those same companies in exchange for the generous service of telling them who needs to be fired in order to finance the debt payments he saddled them with in the first place. Fans of mob movies will recognize what's known as the bust out, in which a gangster takes over a restaurant or sporting goods store and then monetizes his investment by running up giant debts on the company's credit line. Think Pauly and all those cases of Cutty Sark in Goodfellas. When the note comes due, the mobster simply torches the restaurant and collects the insurance money. Reduced to their most basic level, the leveraged buyouts engineered by Romney followed exactly the same business model. It's the bust out, one Wall Street trader says with a laugh. That's all it is. Romney has always kept his distance from the real-life consequences of his profiteering. At one point during Bain's looting of Ampad, a worker named Randy Johnson sent a handwritten letter to Romney asking him to intervene to save an Ampad factory in Marion, Indiana. In a sterling demonstration of manliness and willingness to face a difficult conversation, Romney, who had just lost his race for the Senate in Massachusetts, wrote Johnson that he was sorry, but his lawyers had advised him not to get involved. Over the years, colleagues would anonymously whisper stories about Mitt the boss to the press, describing him as cunning, manipulative, and a little bit nuts, with an ability to identify people's insecurities and exploit them for his own benefit. One former Bain employee said that Romney would screw around with bonuses in small amounts just to mess with people. He would give $3 million to one, $3.1 million to another, and $2.9 million to a third, just to keep those below him on edge. In a typical private equity fragging, Bain put up a mere $18 million to acquire KB Toys and got big banks to finance the remaining $302 million it needed. Less than a year and a half after the purchase, Bain decided to give itself a gift known as a dividend recapitalization. The firm induced KB Toys to redeem $121 million in stock and take out more than $66 million in bank loans, $83 million of which went directly into the pockets of Bain's owners and investors, including Romney. The dividend recap is like borrowing someone else's credit card to take out a cash advance and then leaving them to pay it off, says Heather Slavkin-Corzo, who monitors private equity takeovers as the senior legal policy advisor for the AFL-CIO. One of Romney's first leveraged buyout deals and one of his most profitable involved Mike Milken himself. Bain put down $10 million in cash, got $300 million in financing from Milken, and bought a pair of department store chains, Beals Brothers and Palais Royale. In what should now be a familiar outcome, the two chains, which Bain merged into a single outfit called Stage Stores, filed for bankruptcy protection in 2000 under the weight of more than $444 million in debt. But here's the interesting twist. Romney made the Beals Palais deal just as the federal government was launching charges of massive manipulation and insider trading against Milliken and his firm Drexel Burnham Lambert. In what must have been a lengthy and agonizing period of moral soul-searching, however, Romney decided not to kill the deal despite its shady financing. We did not say, oh my goodness, Drexel has been accused of something, not been found guilty, Romney told reporters years after the deal. Should we basically stop the transaction and blow the whole thing up? In 2010, a year after the last round of Hertz layoffs, Carlyle teamed up with Bain to take $500 million out of another takeover target, the parent company of Dunkin' Donuts and Baskin Robbins. Dunkin' had to take out a $1.25 billion loan to pay a dividend to its new private equity owners. So think of this the next time you go to Dunkin' Donuts for a cup of coffee. A small cup of Joe costs about $1.69 in most outlets, which means that for years to come, Dunkin' Donuts will have to sell about 2.01 million small coffees every month, about $3.4 million, just to meet the interest payments on the loan it took out to pay Bain and Carlyle their little one-time dividend. Which brings us to another aspect of Romney's business career that has largely been hidden from voters. His personal fortune would not have been possible without the direct assistance of the U.S. government. The taxpayer-funded subsidies that Romney has received go well beyond the humdrum backdoor welfare sucking that all supposedly self-made free marketers inevitably indulge in. So there's a little bit about Mitt Romney, and you can find the whole article at rollingstone.com by Matt Taibbi, Greed and Debt, the True Story of Mitt Romney and Bain Capital. When people on the right talk about more free enterprise and how fabulous it is, they're talking about people like Mitt Romney. Also, a fellow called Kevin O'Leary, who just a few short years ago he entertained the delusion that he'd become Prime Minister of Canada. Kevin O'Leary, I suppose most famous for this show Dragon's Den. Yes, I have an idea for an invention of the product. I'm willing to come on television and be humiliated in front of millions of people. Kevin O'Leary, closely associated in one of the most disastrous deals in history, Bain Capital, is such an obnoxious person that he was nicknamed Lebaneser Scrooge. Yes, this is a guy who moans about how his Lebanese grandmother, she suffered so much racial prejudice in Canada. Yeah, well, her daughter got to be a rich man, and you're very, very rich. So, seems like the story had a happy ending. Of course, Kevin O'Leary enjoys the citizenship of both Canada, Ireland, and for some reason, the United Arab Emirates. This is a man who incredibly loves the 1%. Yeah, who doesn't love the 1%? And he said on TV, I think this was on the CBC, the Lang and O'Leary exchange, that it was reported that the 85 richest people in the world hold more wealth than the $3.5 billion poorest people. So what's your reaction to that? Quote, "It's fantastic, and this is a great thing because it inspires everybody, gets them motivation to look up to the 1% and say, I want to become one of those people. I'm going to fight hard to get to the top. This is fantastic news, and of course, I applaud it. What can be wrong with this?" His co-host, Amanda Lang, said, "Really? So someone living on $1 a day in Africa is getting up in the morning and saying, I'm going to be Bill Gates?" Kevin O'Leary put together, basically he made this junk company. You remember, if you're old enough, you buy a computer and you'd get these discs, CD-ROMs, full of maybe hundreds of programs, some of which were shareware, and almost all of them were entirely useless. Well, he made up a little empire with his own company, and then he started buying real companies like the Learning Company, hostile takeovers of real company, the Learning Company and Broderbund, which had an excellent reputation. And so then he set about, let's make a deal with Mattel. And Mattel was, let's say, I have to be careful what I say, let's say disputed estimates of what these companies were worth. Mattel took the bait, urged on by Bain. And again, this is one of the worst takeovers in history. A flurry of lawsuits resulted. I believe Mattel had to pay out $122 million in damages, which was rubbing salt into the wound of the fortune that they lost, the billions of collapse of billions of dollars in their worth. And again, Kevin O'Leary, another rootless cosmopolite like Mitt Romney, is exactly the sort of person that, free enterprise. Yeah. How do you get to be one of the 1%? Well, I suppose, you could start a company which eventually becomes a toll collector, like Microsoft or Google. I'm not discounting, say, Bill Gates' enormous contributions to the computer industry, but it's basically just a toll collector now. The other way you can become one of the 1% is to, well, steal from others. Let's see, Mattel. This is from a piece in the Globe and Mail from 10 years ago. Let me read from this. In 1998, toy giant Mattel made a takeover bid for TLC. Kevin O'Leary renamed the new company TLC because people thought there was value in that name. Mattel purchased TLC for about $4 billion in the spring of 1999. Depending on how debt is considered, the figure ranges from $3.4 billion to $4.2 billion. O'Leary took over as president of Mattel's new TLC digital division, having received a hike in salary from $400,000 to $650,000 and an increase in his severance package from $2.1 million to $5.25 million. A few months after the sale went through, O'Leary sold most of his Mattel stock and pocketed nearly $6 million. Weeks after the sale, CFRA produced a critical report on Mattel, claiming TLC was already experiencing collapsing revenue, a surge in receivables, and a deterioration of operating cash flow. In the third quarter of 1999, Mattel expected profits of $50 million from the TLC division. When Mattel revised that estimate to a loss of between $50 and $100 million, the announcement wiped out more than $2 billion in shareholder value in one day. Golly, that's quite an achievement. Wouldn't you say? That is capitalism 2.0. And what are we going to talk about now? Yes. The wheels are coming off Corona Doom. I mean, the whole narrative is being rewritten. And the question is, are they going to be able to get away with it? This is from Alex Berenson yesterday. Urgent, the pandemic's wrongest man, an occasional series. From the Department of Are You Effing Kidding Me? CNN just ran a piece explaining that scientists are urgently trying to solve the question of whether the endless waves of COVID we now have may be a result of the mRNA technology used to build some COVID-19 vaccines, not making this up. And here's a quotation from CNN Health. But there's another piece of the immunity puzzle the scientists are urgently trying to solve, and that is whether some of this drop-off in our protection may be a result of the mRNA technology used to build some COVID-19 vaccines, such as those developed by Moderna and Pfizer-BioNTech, which were the first in the world to use this platform. Berenson comments, you don't say. Now, scientists are urgently trying to figure out if the mRNA technology is the problem and not the solution. Now, maybe they can urgently try to build a time machine too, or an unvaccine machine. The article also includes this gem from Dr. Anthony Fauci. We got a really great platform with mRNA, Fauci said, but let's try to be better. Okay. Oh, Tony, T-Dog, allow me to translate. I'm not saying it doesn't work at all, okay? Not out loud. I'd be absolutely insane to say that out loud after telling 1 billion people to take it. I'm just saying it could be better. And by better, I mean actually work, but I didn't say that. And finally, this. The United States is at a point in the pandemic now where health officials are grappling with the fact that to maintain immunity against COVID-19 in the community, the nation will either need to administer booster shots on a regular, possibly annual basis, or need to roll out an entirely new vaccine altogether. Yes, apparently we'll need to administer booster shots or roll out an entirely new vaccine altogether, Berenson comments. What you're seeing here is the first steps towards an official acknowledgement that the mRNA vaccines have failed and new vaccines are coming sooner or later. Booster shots? Remember, booster shots are available everywhere now. Second booster shots are available everywhere. And despite endless badgering from media and public health authorities, uptake has been close to zero for months. The side effects are at least as bad with the third and fourth doses as the original two. That is worse than COVID for many, if not most people. And everyone knows the shots will not stop anyone from getting COVID in any case. Thus, the booster campaigns will be allowed to molder probably within months. The White House will excuse the failure of the vaccines as a failure of public opinion, claiming that mRNA vaccine hesitancy has risen to unsustainable levels or some such, and that we need new vaccine technology. By new, I mean old, most likely. They may even be cynical enough to blame those of us who were right all along for said hesitancy. The great mRNA experiment will come to an end not with a bang, but with 200 million expired doses in freezers. Berenson concludes the most likely but by no means certain outcome is zero long-term benefit, zero to some long-term harm, and $100 billion plus for Pfizer and the gang. Heads, science wins. Tails, you lose. So again, the question is, are they going to be able to get away with this? Here is a story from Michael Gotthaus at Fast Company. Oxfam International has a new report out today that highlights the rapidly widening gap between the few ultra-rich and the world's poorest. The report, titled Profiting from Pain, found that during the first 2 years of the pandemic, a new billionaire was minted every 30 hours, with a total of 573 of the world's richest becoming billionaires during that time frame. On the flip side, in 2022, Oxfam expects 1 million people to fall into extreme poverty every 33 hours, nearly the same rate a new billionaire is minted. The astonishing rate that people in all over the world are set to fall into extreme poverty, 263 million people in 2022 alone, is due to the rapidly rising costs of living, including everything from the cost of energy to the cost of food. While the billionaires who control these assets will profit even more, hundreds of millions could be priced out of staying alive. Announcing the release of the report, Gabriella Butcher, executive director of Oxfam International, said, quote, "Billionaires' fortunes have not increased because they are now smarter or working harder. Workers are working harder for less pay and in worse conditions. The super rich have rigged the system with impunity for decades, and they are now reaping the benefits. They have seized a shocking amount of the world's wealth as a result of privatization and monopolies, gutting regulation and workers' rights while stashing their cash in tax havens, all with the complicity of governments. Meanwhile, millions of others are skipping meals, turning off the heating, falling behind on bills, and wondering what they can possibly do next to survive. Across East Africa, one person is likely dying every minute from hunger. This grotesque inequality is breaking the bonds that hold us together as humanity. It is divisive, corrosive, and dangerous. This is inequality that literally kills," unquote. Other shocking findings: the world's 2,668 billionaires own 12.7 trillion of the planet's wealth, with the world's 10 richest men owning more than the poorest 3.1 billion people on Earth. But this is Darwinian or Spencerian, one might say. This is the way of the world. It is science. It is ineluctable. It cannot be resisted. And of course, we see that globalization is the 21st century version of Marxism, which of course also claimed to be scientific and ineluctable. Here's a story by Joel Kotkin at the American Mind, What COVID Hath Wrought. Glenn Elmer's analysis of COVID and Trump represents a classic and effective account of the situation from the perspective of declining liberty and adherence to traditional values. But though it is important and necessary to hold on to our highest ideals, I would like to emphasize what is actually taking place on the ground and its likely long-term implication. Statistics show that COVID accelerated economic, demographic, and geographic trends which were already existent but rarely acknowledged. These trends include large-scale migration to the south, the west, and the suburbs. COVID also, as Elmer suggests, sharpened the conflict between many Americans and the ruling expert class, who, unlike most Americans, actually flourished under COVID. I am less sure, Kotkin writes, that Trump was a force for good in all this, given his profound personal failings and mixed messaging during the pandemic. Yet he did stir up dissent against the overweening policies of some governors. In this sense, the health crisis intensified an already existing political one. Looking forward, post-COVID reality has seen the emergence of powerful populist politics in both parties and a marked drop in public esteem for the nation's once revered institutions. In the short run, the pandemic strengthened the position of the ruling metropolitan elites centered in Puget Sound, the Bay Area, and New York City. Financial and technology moguls' net worth has surged during the pandemic, while many businesses in the analog community suffered devastatingly. Overall, poor and minority communities endured fatalities at twice the average rate of other areas. Minorities and the poor also often lost their jobs, which usually could not be done remotely. Their housing, health needs, and reliance on transit made them all the more vulnerable. In the middle class, the census shows that two-thirds of small businesses have suffered from the pandemic, with 200,000 more closings than usual in the first year. As a consequence, the population of propertyless, destitute, and barely surviving serfs is expanding rapidly, both here and around the world. In the US alone, the ranks of the lower classes are projected to increase by as much as 50% to levels not seen in at least half a century. The other big winners have been the clerisy, the class that clusters in academia, in the upper bureaucracy, and in such professions as education, consultancy, law, top-level government, and specialized medicine. One analyst, Michael Lind, estimates what he calls the overclass makes up some 15% of the American workforce, making it far larger than the old First Estate, which was closer to 1% of the French population. Kotkin continues, yet even as the companies headquartered in the big cities flourished, their human capital began to depart for less crowded places. As in the past, dense centers, what historian William McNeill described as the confluence of the civilized disease pools, suffer worst from pandemics, as did ancient Rome, the great cities of the Renaissance, the Islamic Caliphate, and China. In COVID, dense urban centers suffered generally the worst fatality rates. This still remained the case even as the disease spread to every corner of the country. One unintended consequence, the big cities themselves are increasingly abandoned to those without the resources to escape them. Even as the severity of the pandemic has faded, what historian Kyle Harper describes as the relentless evolution of the pathogen has continued, albeit in a less lethal but more contagious form. This may explain in part why the return to the office has been slower than some predicted. This has been particularly marked in San Francisco, Chicago, and most importantly, New York, where midtown offices are still half empty. Even San Francisco, with one of the nation's strongest CBD industries, has suffered rising office vacancies and has done poorly luring workers back. Overall, the pandemic served to exacerbate the economic decline of large, dense cities. Today, most of the highest rates of unemployment are among large metros, while the weakest job recoveries are evident in places such as New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago. The big winners have been primarily in places such as Houston, Dallas, Phoenix, and even Midwestern cities like Columbus. This economic shift comes on the heel of long developing demographic trends. Despite all the talk of moving back to the city, suburbs account for about 90% of all U.S. metropolitan growth since 2010. Between 2010 and 2020, the suburbs and exurbs of the major metropolitan areas gained 2.0 million net domestic migrants, while the urban core counties lost 2.7 million. Amid fear of pestilence, the rise of online work, and rising crime, we have seen a marked decline of urban populations over the past 2 years. In the last year, the biggest migration losses took place in 3 key states: New York, New Jersey, and Illinois. On the surface, these trends would seem to favor a more conservative politics and more power to red states. In 1960, New York accounted for 45 electoral votes, while Texas had 24 and Florida 10. In 2024, New York will be down to 28, while Texas has gone to 40 and Florida to 30. California, which has been the one great blue-tilted megastate, still leads with 54 votes, but has actually lost one due to below average population growth, even a decline in 2021, making a demographic resurgence more dubious. Yet these changes may not be enough to moderate the authoritarian tendencies of blue politicians, deepened but not created by the pandemic. As one observer at Tablet noted, the authorities have assumed that they alone had the truth, and other opinions are to be excluded until, as occurred with the lab leak, the possibilities were too compelling to ignore. Throughout the pandemic, progressive control of most public institutions, as well as the major technology firms, redounded to their great advantage. Those who differed on key issues, such as the effectiveness of broad lockdown policies or the origins of the virus, suffered virtual exclusion by the main internet platforms. Even distinguished epidemiologists who disagreed with COVID orthodoxy found themselves in the digital gulag. Not satisfied with this as yet still limited censorship, some progressive academics now claim that China's information control policy on the pandemic was right compared to our still unruly system. They suggest that Chinese-style controls on media should replace our historically more contentious and permissive approach. The clerisy remains convinced of the efficacy and urgency of tough lockdowns. They are willing to silence dissent as a way of pursuing their agenda, which they deem not only right but morally urgent and indisputable. More fundamentally, the idea current among our governing elites is that authority rests with the authorities, not the populace. Kotkin continues, it may well be that lockdowns, at least as implemented and at such durations, has been proven largely ineffective, as the number of fatalities did not vary much between hard lockdown states and less controlled states. But the implications of this are too discordant for a media that favors control over more nuanced approaches, such as those adopted in Sweden, which focused on vulnerable populations. Our own clerisy is all in on lockdowns. Considering or even acknowledging the existence of other methods would for them be admitting total and unredeemable failure. So much for adherence to science and the scientific method. Like Elmer's, I feel that the COVID years represent not an aberration from democratic political norms, but the first clear expression of a new autocratic system which only needed the opportunity to make itself known. Crises like the pandemic illustrate a sociologist, Robert Michels' iron law of oligarchy. And if you listen to me read the entirety of James Burnham's The Machiavellians, you will remember that Michels is one of the great Machiavellians. This was articulated in the early 20th century. The more complex the issue, the greater the need for elite-driven solutions. A progression of crises, real, exaggerated, or even imagined, sets the table for authoritarian approaches. As Italian philosopher Giorgio Agamben suggests, a society that lives in a permanent state of emergency cannot be free. And as we have seen, or if you listen to me saying, that we are living in a permanent state of political emergency, such as that, as the other Kotkin, Stephen Kotkin, pointed out in his biography of Stalin, was engineered by the Bolsheviks in order to create and maintain a dictatorship. Back to Kotkin. Sadly, the pandemic may not be the ultimate expression of this new autocracy. In their oddly theocratic way, some environmentalists view the pandemic, like climate change, as a kind of comeuppance for the evil impact of humans on Earth. Nature is sending us a message, suggests the UN's environment chief, Inger Andersen, in reference to the virus. Unsurprisingly, zealots like the Guardian's George Monbiot have embraced this account of things. For some Greens, the policies used to battle the virus can serve as a test run for what they believe will be necessary to save humanity. Like the more extreme lockdown advocates, they seek to justify unprecedented controls over the daily lives of the masses. Much of this is couched in dogma based on consistent exaggeration and predictions of impending environmental doom, including unrealized claims made in the 1970s that natural resources, including energy and food, would run out, leading to mass starvation. Indeed, whereas COVID restrictions are still seen as temporary, the climate solutions proposed by true believers would not be. Some progressive pundits openly favor replacing democracy with a global technocracy that would preempt popular control and allow experts to implement policies of their own design. This would entail the marriage of large capital with what former California Governor Jerry Brown approvingly calls the coercive power of the state. In this new formulation, political approval from the masses is needless. Policies are simply imposed. As with COVID, climate totalitarianism would require total curation of information. Already, climate policy skeptics, even when highly credentialed, are consigned to the digital gulag. Google has proposed to censor comments about climate that do not adhere to the so-called consensus of scientists, which of course is circular logic. Shutting down the serious debates over the nature of the crisis and the best, most equitable ways to address it, our elites have announced their intention simply to declare what consensus is rather than confronting it through free inquiry. Kotkin continues, yet if the pandemic has taught us anything, it is that people need to challenge the priorities of their so-called betters. After all, political leaders, notes historian Harper, should have seen this not as an act of God, but as a perfectly inevitable disaster, one likely to remain part of our future, particularly due to high-density living and easy global travel. These realities carry both threats and some possible opportunities, just as the plague transformed Europe and helped usher in the modern capitalist era, in part by raising the cost of labor. It also eventually led to critical improvements in public health, particularly in terms of sanitation and water systems. London's emergence as the first megacity since Rome would not have happened without it. Cleaner buildings, better ventilation, and better control of pests should be a part of the post-COVID environment. But it will not be easy to limit governmental authority during an emergency. Agamben writes of sanitation terror and a religion of health that leads some to pitilessly abandon the paradigm of bourgeois democracy. Like the quarantined residents in Camus' The Plague, we lived in a pit of despond, a life more like that of prisoners than citizens. Some of Agamben's admirers found dissent from authority unacceptable amidst COVID, viewing it as clearly an appeal to the political right. Yet if Agamben, like Elmer's, worries about pestilence boosting government control, history suggests the experience can also lead to pushback. The Arab historian Ibn Khaldun, who experienced the Black Death himself in Tunisia, noted that pestilence tended to weaken central authority and even put an end to dynasties. Under the pressure of the plague, he wrote, the entire inhabited world changed. And again, this is an excellent essay from Joel Kotkin at AmericanMind.org called What COVID Hath Wrought. And more on this. This is from the Houston Chronicle, Amanda Drain. And okay, soaring diesel fuel. Okay, it's asking me to subscribe to continue. Okay, it didn't tell me that this morning. Oh wait, hang on. I know how to cheat this. Come on. No, it's not letting me cheat. Anyway, soaring diesel prices. You know that they're soaring. Okay. I can't access this story right now. But Build Back Better. It's becoming increasingly clear what that means. In the future, the near future, you will own nothing and you will be happy. This is from Steve Watson at Summit News. Joe Biden let the veil slip Monday, telling reporters gathered at a press conference in Tokyo that unaffordable gas prices in the U.S. are part of a deliberate transition to green energy. Suddenly, Vladimir Putin isn't to blame anymore, as a reporter asked if a U.S. recession is unavoidable. Struggling to speak coherently, Biden said, quote, when it comes to the gas prices, we're going through an incredible transition that is taking place that, God willing, when it's over, will be stronger. The world will be stronger and less reliant on fossil fuels when this is over, unquote. Biden also claimed he attempted to combat soaring prices by releasing 180 million barrels of oil from emergency stockpiles in late March, but admitted that it hadn't any effect. So guess what he's doing now? The same thing. But no, there's no doubt in my mind that what Build Back Better means is the destruction of the middle class. The middle class, too uppity. It was the middle class that elected Trump in 2016. It wasn't the lower class for the most part. It wasn't those people dependent on government assistance because they vote overwhelmingly for the Democratic Party. And it wasn't the upper class, because those people vote overwhelmingly for the Democratic Party. So the middle class must be destroyed. Tucker Carlson continues to become more and more based, saying the kind of things that I can hardly believe are allowed to be said on American network television. Here's what he had to say yesterday. Things are changing fast, as you know, and you can tell how fast they're changing by the way that people talk about politics. Language reflects feelings and thoughts. When your views change, so does the way you talk about them. That's especially true of liberals who have very deep feelings, and their main feeling, this has always been true, is contempt for you. If you ever listen to NPR, you know exactly how much contempt liberals have for you, and you get to pay for it. NPR takes your tax dollars and then lectures you about how immoral you are. That is liberalism distilled. It's been going on a long time. NPR has been running this particular scam since 1971, but the sneering tone you hear on NPR has been the hallmark of liberals for nearly a century. Liberals have contempt for Dwight Eisenhower, Barry Goldwater, and Richard Nixon. Boy, did they, and for Gerald Ford, even. If you're old enough to remember Ronald Reagan, you will recall vividly how liberals felt about him. Reagan was an idiot, they told you, a mouth breather, and so was anybody who would vote for him, very much including you. In the words of Al Gore, Republicans were the, quote, extra chromosome right wing, unquote. So they were literally genetically defective. That's how liberals actually talk. I just wonder how many of these people, who felt this way about Ronald Reagan knew anything about him. For instance, that he was a college graduate. Yes, from Eureka College. And he graduated from this college in 1932. And I would guess that this Disciples of Christ college, a small one, that Ronald Reagan got a better and more extensive university education than those at Harvard and Yale get today. But back to Tucker Carlson. Whenever two or more liberals are gathered, you will find sanctimony, but there's a new inflection. You may have noticed it recently. The pivot, and it was a pivot, came 6 years ago. It was during the 2016 presidential campaign. Liberals seemed to lose any remaining sense of humor in the moment Donald Trump arrived. Why? Well, because he called their bluff. Looking back, it's obvious what happened. By 2016, no one could argue that liberal programs, or many programs, the various fads and metaphorical wars we were waging on this or that bad thing, that there was no evidence that any of it had done anything to improve American life. Liberals promised that they would make everything great, but they didn't. In fact, every single liberal enthusiasm failed, from radical feminism to urban renewal, from outsourcing the so-called sharing economy. All of them, each and every one, turned out to be a complete disaster. The reason 2016 was significant is that liberals could no longer deny this. They couldn't say, give us another 50 years and we'll turn Baltimore into Geneva. Yeah, I want to say something about that. You may have noticed that how much coverage do you see, say, of Baltimore on the news, or Detroit on the news, or St. Louis in the news? I could give other examples. The reason that you're not hearing anything about those cities is because, no, I'm not going to look at it. Not going to look at it. Just too horrible. But wasn't it your policies that led to these cities becoming so horrible that one must avert one's eyes? Shut up about that. And what do we hear now in terms of, I don't know, what used to be called the Negro question? What we hear now is not anything which is going to improve the lives of blacks in the United States. We just hear educated or semi-educated blacks screaming about how evil white people are, about white nationalism and white supremacy and systemic racism and critical race theory. How is any of this improving the lives of black people, particularly those 50% of black people, I would estimate, whose lives are so objectively horrible that the people who claim to be their champions just avert their eyes? Nope, can't bear to look at that. Does anyone notice this? Is there no self-awareness among these people? Clearly, there's no self-awareness among these people. So Tucker Carlson points out that Donald Trump won more non-white votes than any Republican presidential candidate ever, but they didn't stop. They just increased the volume, and by 2020, a lot of Americans were just exhausted. Fine, we'll vote for a mannequin if only you will calm down. That was the unspoken yet very clear deal that liberals made with the country. If you ditch the orange men, we will stop screaming and burning your cities, and we can all be Americans again. So people voted for Biden, maybe not 81 million, but some people did. But Democrats didn't mean it. By January of last year, the Democratic Party had more power than in any other time since FDR was president. But the telling point, the tip-off, was that they didn't seem happy about it. If anything, they seemed angrier than ever. Why? Because they had lost faith in their own program. Well, perhaps there have been studies done on this. People who are right-wing tend to be more content than people who are left-wing. What animates the left wing now is certainly not any set of policies, any desire to ameliorate the lives of the less fortunate. It is to punish people who disagree with them. That's it. That's all that it is. We found out, we learned from Kotkin about, people moving to the suburbs and the exurbs. And these people need cars, almost without exception, to get to their place of work. So what's Joe Biden saying? Well, it's just tremendous that gas prices are going through the roof, such that people are they're going to have to quit their jobs because they can't afford to drive back and forth. I suppose this is another way of punishing the middle class. Tucker Carlson says instead of trying to fix the country, they decided to destroy the country and just start over. Yes, ground zero, they call it. If you're watching from outside, it looked like they were having a fit. They erupted into an uncontrollable, nihilistic rage. They swept the plates off the table, punched a hole in the drywall, threw a base on the TV, burn it down, let's start over. They called this the equity agenda, and you should have been nervous when you listened to him talk about it, because every time he talked about the equity agenda, they scowled. Here's him at his inauguration. And now a rise of political extremism, white supremacy, domestic terrorism that we must confront and we will defeat. Our history has been a constant struggle between the American ideal that we're all created equal and the harsh, ugly reality that racism, nativism, fear, demonization have long torn us apart. The battle is perennial. It sounds like a Calvinist preacher in the 17th century, raging against the devil. But yes, the final battle, I suppose, of what these people want, that we will be, actually, Tucker Carlson meant that, maybe something more. Carl Cameron, a former Fox correspondent, said that people like Tucker Carlson, they must be dealt with. It must be dealt with. I just want to go to this. That, he's screaming fire in a crowded theater. And we know what happens to people who scream fire in a crowded theater. But what if there is a fire in a crowded theater? No one seems to mention that. The administration is beginning to make a move on that, said Cameron. Maybe wind up in jail or maybe something worse, unquote. Well, what's something worse? We're not sure what something worse is, but it certainly feels like we're moving toward it at a very high speed at this point. So maybe it's just not enough to put dissidents not enough to ruin them. Maybe not enough to put them in prison. Maybe something more is needed. And what might that be? Exile? I don't think they'd want us, they'd like for us to have the ability to escape. That could only mean death, right? So I want to talk about the seventh episode of the sixth season of Better Call Saul. And it is it represents a caesura. It's a break. As with what Mad Men and Breaking Bad, we're going to take the final season and split it in two, I guess, to build up anticipation. You've heard me complain that he's in these long form dramas, that there is a problem with we don't want to get rid of popular characters. And then I've been complaining that these dramas, that they need more irrevocable events to occur. Well, we certainly got an irrevocable event last night in Better Call Saul. I am not going to give away too much about what happened, because I know if you haven't seen it and I spoil it for you, you will be angry with me. You know how it works in these serials, that you have episodes in which, oh, let's have some fun, let's look at the characters, let's set things up for future episodes. And then there's other episodes which are like, hammer blow, or series of hammer blows. This episode was written and directed by Thomas Schnauz, and outstanding job. Also outstanding cinematography by Marshall Adams, and editing by Skip McDonald. Now, back in the old days of TV, I suppose particularly more in sitcoms than in dramas, you would have parallel narratives. Well, in the really old days of TV, you'd have like one narrative, which is why, as James Wolcott said, you ended up with things like a 7-minute segment where Mary Tyler Moore is talking to Rhoda about her new boyfriend. And of course, Rhoda is the loser. So her boyfriend is going to have some stupid, risible job. And oh, it turns out he's a tree surgeon. Why is that such a stupid, risible job, by the way? But never mind. And that's all that's happening in the 7 minutes. Of course, television has become much, much denser, that you have an A story and a B story, and commonly now a C story as well. And then I suppose the stakes were very much raised by Seinfeld, which decided that the A story, the B story, and the C story had to intersect and, conclude, that all three of them, A, B, and C, they would be resolved at the same time at the end of the episode. Now, you saw that with Seinfeld, that it was often pushed, beyond where it should have gone, but often it worked delightfully. And this certainly works in the latest episode of Better Call Saul. If you follow me on Twitter, you will have seen that the image that I used, I'm not going to compare, Better Call Saul or Breaking Bad, say, to the work of Robert Bresson, but actually I am, because you see a great deal of attention to details, or to say body parts, or to angles that you typically just don't see in television or in any other movies. I've shown a close-up of a man wearing a suit. You see his cuff extended, and he's got his fingers around a can of Schweppes ginger ale. I mean, he's grasping it from all sides. Why is this important? Why is it important? Well, it's quite striking visually, but also it's important plot-wise as well, because there is a critical mediation meeting about the settlement, the Sandpiper settlement. A bunch of old people in old age homes were ripped off ruthlessly, overcharged by this company called Sandpiper. And this case has been dragging on for years, as such cases tend to do, because we're talking about, tens or hundreds of millions of dollars in damages, actual damages and punitive damages as well. So this is a critical meeting, and a mediator is appearing, who is going to attempt to find some sort of compromise between the very hardline position taken by Howard Hamlin and the less hardline position taken by Rich Schweikert, who is representing Sandpiper. So a young man comes in, and he's clearly new to the firm, HHM, and he's startled to see Howard Hamlin already in the conference room, and he's holding up a tray of a cardboard tray, one of the ones with the top cut off, of soft drinks. And so he lurches and he spills a bunch of these cans onto the ground. So he's putting them in the mini fridge. So Howard Hamlin asks him about himself. He says, I didn't expect to see you in here so soon. And he says his name is Kerry and he's new to the firm. And Howard Hamlin says to him, what happens when you drop a can of soda or you shake it? And this young man, Kerry, says, oh, yeah, like that. He says, yes. He says, let me show you something, okay? A trick. And he picks up one of the cans and he puts it on the table and he puts his fingers all around it and he twirls it like this. And he says, apparently the centrifugal force exerted draws the bubbles from the side and the top. Thus, the can won't explode when you open it. And he said, I learned this from Charles McGill, who, of course, is one of the founders of HHM and Jimmy McGill's brother. And there's a portrait of him, a large portrait on the wall. I hope Michael McKean gets to keep this after the show is over. And so the young man asks, who is that? Well, that's Charles McGill, the finest legal mind I ever met. And the young man says, well, perhaps one day people will say that about me. And Howard Hamlin is thoughtful and says, well, perhaps that's not the most important thing. But he explains that Charles McGill was always looking out for all possible eventualities. And Howard Hamlin is a very organized person. It's just become a cliche to throw around this term OCD. People were mocking him in last week's episode because, coffee foam was spilled, all coffee foam and milk was spilled all over his granite countertops. And immediately he went there with a cloth to clean them off. And I thought, you don't want your granite countertops to be permanently stained, do you? I mean, that's a thing a reasonable person would do. Howard Hamlin is the wasp in this story. I don't know whether there's, a hatred of him as a character, but many people seem to delight in his, his failings, his personal, professional failings, because he is very much an old school wasp. But this is a Mametian episode, you could say, in two ways. As mentioned previously, Jimmy McGill, Saul Goodman, and his wife and partner decided to, Kim Wexler, they did a very Mametian thing. They decided to bring down Howard Hamlin, and they're both, personally and professionally connected to him for reasons of various reasons, but mostly, as far as I can see, spite and wickedness. And they run a short con on him, which is a distraction from a long con. And that's a pretty good technique. And it turns out that that Saul and Kim, or Jimmy and Kim, are very good at this sort of thing. And the plot, the long con, which they have come up to bring down Howard, is, as Homer Simpson would say, fiendish in its intricacy, or just plain fiendish, I suppose. Now, you'll note, if you're familiar with David Mamet, the idea of having, plan B, plan C, because unlike, say, in, Mission Impossible, the TV show or the movies, oh, such and such, we know that such and such a person is going to be in position X at 4:35 p.m. Oh, you know that, do you? How do you know that for a certainty? So you want to build redundancy into your plan. Now, the payoff of the long con that we saw last night, there was not a lot of redundancy built into it, and it was only a fortuitous coincidence. That is to say, Jimmy seeing the mediator in a liquor store, um, clearly having recently broken his arm, which led to last minute adjustments, reshoots to the plan. It is not possible to plan for every eventuality. I suppose we should know this, right? But this is really brought home forcefully in yesterday's episode and in a surprising way. I like surprises myself, and it's difficult to pull off surprises these days. Suffice to say that, oh, well, at least the critics and the internet, social media, was shocked by last night's episode. It was nice to see what's probably the final appearance of the drama kids in Better Call Saul. And they don't have names. The leading ones, there's a young man and a young woman. And amusingly, the young woman was dressed up as what are they called? A gelfling from the Dark Crystal, cosplaying or something like that. And the male one, the photographer, he had a rather more expanded role. And it turns out he's one of these AV snobs. Don't touch the equipment. You're not equipped to deal with this equipment. This equipment is far beyond your needs, far beyond you. He's comparing one camera, a high end at the time Canon, versus this, what did you say, 360 of P of so-called resolution. Very, very amusing and quite on point. Yesterday I was talking about the problem of Sally Reed on Barry, and how a lot of people hate her, and how Bill Hader and Alec Berg think this is unfair. After all, Barry kills people. Well, I suppose we sort of run into that problem in Better Call Saul with Jimmy McGill and Kim Wexler. I've really come to hate Kim Wexler with a passion. Does she do anything worse than what Jimmy McGill does? Well, not really, but it seems that for some time now she has been leading him on in a direction that he really doesn't want to go, and rather making it implicit that if you want to remain with me, you will let me be the ringleader of the pranks, the kind of pranks, the very amusing pranks, and they're laughing up a storm as they're destroying Howard Hamlin. You got to let me be in charge. And it's clear that Kim Wexler is indeed sexually excited by all this. Howard says, that Jimmy was born this way. I don't think anyone is born anyway, but I understand what he meant. He says that Kim Wexler has a piece missing. Well, that's for another time, philosophical discussion of what evil means, whether it is simply the absence of good or whether it is something more positive. And in positive, I mean bad. But I thought this was a thrilling and moving episode of Better Call Saul. At the beginning of the season, you will recall me moaning, when are they going to get to the fireworks factory? Meaning, Omaha. But it's worked out. It's paid off. And so I withdraw my previous objections. And those are my thoughts about last night's Better Call Saul. Take a final look at the chat. No, as Chogo above wrote, Canada Dry. What? There's a okay. Wink Canada Dry, originally Belfast style ginger ale, made for Toronto Orangemen, supposedly to try to keep them off the booze. But don't people add spirits to ginger ale? What's that? 7 and 7? One of the most obnoxious drinks ever devised. Very popular in the United States, with name from Seagram 7 and 7 Up. That's not quite ginger ale, you know. But I mean, rye whiskey, or Canadian whiskey, as you call it in the United States, is already revoltingly sweet. And then to add ginger ale or 7 Up, it's just like, are you looking forward to vomiting? Schweppes is a beverage brand that originated in the Republic of Geneva and that is sold around the world. It sold the world's first soft drink bottled soda water in 1783, according to Don Willis and Wikipedia. Ginger ale is one strange drink, says Oscar Toe. It is commonly given, or it used to be, to people who were feeling under the weather, sickly, with stomach problems. You know, it's really highly carbonated. It has a revivifying effect. Any fine-looking women in Better Call Saul? Not particularly. Rhoda Morgenstern was hot. Her name, not so much. You may have heard me go on at exhaustive length about this sometime in the past. I found Rhoda Morgenstern so much more attractive than Mary in every single way. Every single way. But of course, Mary Richards, she was the woman of the future. And I don't know, by the end of that show, Mary Richards just looked like a husk, just exhausted, worn out. Jules Roy says, a good thing when flying on a Canadian airline is they always have ginger ale, not the case on American Airlines. And on that bombshell, I'm going to wrap up today's show. Thank you all for tuning in. Very much appreciated. I shall be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you'd like to make a donation to the live stream, my PayPal account is linked to Kevin_Grace at hotmail.com. If you are in Canada, donations to the live stream may be made directly via Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this benediction. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.